Right, solicitors around the country have been protesting over cuts in legal aid, and the BBC has received reports that there have been cases in which suspects who've been arrested by police had to be released without questioning after 24 hours because a solicitor couldn't be present. Lawyers say their protest is a bid to highlight the plight of defendants who can't pay for legal advice. Our reporter Dan Johnson is outside the Magistrates' Court in Manchester with some lawyers.
Well, these solicitors are protesting about cuts to the fees in legal aid. Just to get some basics in place, that is the free legal advice that is on hand for people who can't afford their own lawyer. If they find themselves under arrest or having to appear in court and can't afford their own lawyer, they'll get a legal advisor through legal aid. But the fees were cut last year and again this year, and some of these solicitors say that leaves them with just not enough money to do their job properly. So they say it's created chaos in some courts and in some custody suites. We understand that some people have had to be released from police custody because they couldn't be questioned in time because a lawyer wasn't available. And I was in a court case yesterday, a very serious case, where a number of defendants had to represent themselves. And when one defendant was asked by the judge if he understood the procedure that was happening in court, he actually replied to the judge, "I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do without my solicitor." But the lawyers say they will carry on protesting because they say the cuts just don't give them enough money to do their job. Oliver Gardner is a local solicitor, part of this campaign. How strong is the feeling amongst people here?
Well, as you can see, the feeling's extremely strong. I think nationally about 85% of lawyers have decided to refuse any new work since the cuts were introduced on the 1st of July.
And is this all just about money? There are some serious issues, aren't there, here? There could be miscarriages of justice if people don't have representation.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the case. It isn't about money. The reality is that the government have introduced cuts after 20 years of no rises. People think, well, lawyers earn too much money, what's the problem? These are cuts that equate to about 20% of the income. That's against a backdrop of no rises for over 20 years. It's not about the money as far as lawyers are concerned. We haven't complained for 20 years. We didn't complain when 8.75% cuts were introduced last year. The reality, though, is that the cuts that have been introduced on the 1st of July make it impossible for us to be able to do our job properly. And we've taken the decision independently and collectively that rather than do the work without being properly resourced, which would mean the job won't be done properly, we would rather not do it at all. It's too important not to do the job properly.
And how big an impact has your action had on courts?
Well, we've been effectively refusing any new work now for, I think, 8 days. This is the 8th day, and we are hearing stories from around the country whereby people are not being represented, people are being remanded into custody, people are having decisions made in relation to cases which ordinarily, if lawyers were involved, those decisions wouldn't be made. For example, the prosecution, we hear, are taking a very lenient view with cases because they know it's too much hassle to charge and put people before the court. So across the board, it's having a very significant impact.
But you're putting people in that situation.
Well, we're not putting people in this position. What we could do, as I've said, is act for these people at either a loss to our businesses, which means that eventually we'd be out of business, our staff would lose jobs, or we could remain profitable by cutting corners and still acting for these people. But as I've said, we're not prepared to put our clients, the people who need this service, we're not prepared to put them at risk of miscarriages of justice by acting when we're not properly resourced and doing a substandard job. It's the government that are putting people in this position, not us. And while we're still able to, we're demonstrating what it will be like in 6 or 9 months when these cuts come in and properly impact across the board.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Well, there have been some disruptions to quite serious cases. We understand a murder case yesterday had to be adjourned because no lawyer was available for the defendant. We have had a statement from the Ministry of Justice. They say courts have been sitting as usual and the vast majority of cases requiring a solicitor at the police station have been picked up within an hour. They say although this transition will be challenging, the changes we are pressing ahead with are designed to ensure we have a system of criminal legal aid that delivers value for money for taxpayers, that provides high-quality legal advice to those who need it most, and that puts the profession on a sustainable footing for the long term.
Cheers, Dan. Thank you very much. Right, slightly later than normal because